Okay, so yeah, so my name's Jody Vallance. I work for Moors for the Future Partnership as a communication and engagement officer, and Moors for the Future is a partnership with a number of different organisations who I'll show you at some point in the presentation. And most of the work we do is restoring the moors in the Peak District and South Pennines. We do a few other bits and bobs as well, which I might go into a little bit about. So first of all, I've got a couple of slides that I'd like to share with you, and I'd like you to try and guess where they are. If I do this live, I ask people to call out, but I think you're probably all on mute. So, okay, I'm trying to move the slide on. Ah, here we are. There we go. So, does anyone know where that is? And you can nod or right, and then does anyone know where that one is? So the first one is on Black Hill a few years ago now, and you can see that it's kind of completely bare of any vegetation up there, and it's been described as the most degraded upland landscape in Europe. This one, similar looking, but that's actually the surface of the moon. So that is kind of a comparison to show kind of how bare of life it was up there, and not many places are quite as bad as that anymore. But that's the kind of thing that we were kind of founded to tackle. And so the first thing I'm going to tell you about is kind of what the problem is and why it's a problem, and then I'll go a bit into how we're trying to tackle that problem and why. So and then a little bit about our research work and a bit about our communications work as well. So as you can see, I mean, you might already have some thoughts, you might already know quite a lot about what's wrong with a landscape like that. It's peat. There's nothing growing there, and that's kind of really the main thing, and that's kind of the bread and butter of our work, is tackling that issue. And the way I'm going to answer that question is to kind of talk to you about what's good, what's right with a moor or a blanket bog that is in really good condition. So this is a picture of a moor in much better condition, and you can see a big patch of sphagnum moss here. You can see it's really, really wet, and there's lots of vegetation growing. So we talk about the multiple benefits of healthy moorland or healthy blanket bog, and those are listed here. So I'm talking particularly about climate change and tackling climate change today, but there's lots of other things as well. So blanket bogs are a huge carbon store. Well, all bogs are a huge carbon store, and peat is about 50% carbon. So that's one really big reason to preserve and make sure that they're in a healthy and in good condition. It's also a unique habitat. They're a source of clean water. That all the moors that we're talking about are in the uplands, so they're on tops of the hills where a lot of the rain falls in the Pennines. They've got the potential to reduce the risk and severity of flooding. They're obviously a lovely place to go and visit, and lots of people enjoy them for various reasons. And a lovely place to enjoy and connect with nature, which we know so much about it being good for us. And then in a much wetter condition, they've got the potential to reduce the risk of wildfires as well. So I'm going to just go into a bit more detail on each of those points. So first of all, they're a huge carbon store. So deep peat, which is what a blanket bog is, a blanket bog's defined as over 40 centimetres of peat, but some of the bogs, some of the moors in the Peat District have been measured up to 5 metres deep of peat. So if you think how much carbon that is, they're the biggest terrestrial carbon store. And in the top picture, you can see that peat is that carbon's being lost. So that is a big source of carbon dioxide. So it's either being eroded and washed into rivers and eventually finding its way into the atmosphere, or when it dries out, it decomposes and turns back into greenhouse gases. So in poor condition, it's a big source of carbon. And in good condition, it's a carbon sink. So in a really healthy blanket bog is taking, the plants are taking carbon dioxide in, and then because they don't decompose, because they're in waterlogged and acidic conditions, they don't decompose and they turn into peat, and that stores that carbon that's being taken in. So a lot of the bogs in Britain are now carbon sources because they're not in good condition. So it's really, really crucial that we at least stop them emitting carbon, and ideally, eventually, which is a slow process, get them back to a state where they're actually taking carbon in and sequestering it. So they're a huge carbon store. They're unique. Well, they've got they're a lovely source of biodiversity. So you've got all the beautiful kind of boggy plants, and I think cotton grass is one of my favourites, and unique animals. So in this, we've got the golden plover, we've got the mountain hare, which is actually native to Scotland and was introduced here a couple of 100 years ago for hunting, but has now become a favourite. Green hairstreak tends to enjoy the uplands. This is a bilberry bumblebee, which is a kind of upland specific bumblebee, short-eared owl, and many others. So it's, you know, it's restoring the moors has lots and lots of benefits, and one of them is to provide that habitat for lots of fantastic nature. So the moors are a source of clean water. So in good condition, so with plenty of sphagnum moss, they are able to hold water and then gradually release it, and much of the water that we drink comes from reservoirs that have been fed by the moors. In poor condition, the peat that washes off the moors because of weathering and erosion, which ends up in the reservoirs, costs so much to take out of the reservoir. So it then settles on the bottom, and the reservoirs have to be dredged. And I'm afraid I don't have the figures to hand, but it's quite shocking. When they remove it, they have to dispose of it as contaminated waste, because it contains so much pollution from the Industrial Revolution. Those top layers of peat that are washing down contain a lot of heavy metals. So yeah, so having it in good condition is really important for water quality. And so 3 of our partners are water companies who are, you know, contributing to our work, so that because it works, it's cost effective for them to prevent that sediment ending up in their reservoirs. So yeah, and then it also, talking about water, it again, in good condition, it can reduce the risk and the severity of flooding through natural flood management. So you might have heard the term natural flood management. It's probably best if I show you. I've got a video to show you. So yeah, let's just go straight to that. So it's this one. Can you see that? Is it working? Yeah, okay. So I'll run through it. This is a model that if I'd been able to talk to you face to face, I would have shown you. And we use it when we go out to talk to people as well. This is bare peat. So it's a model, but if the water runs straight off the peat, it obviously goes really fast. With vegetation, oh, I'll just go back a sec. With vegetation growing, that slows the flow quite a lot. We call it surface roughness. So vegetation increases the roughness of the surface, and that slows the water down. In this one, we've also got some gully blocks in there, which I'll explain a bit more about. But you can see, I'll just play it again. You can, if you watch the bottom here, and the water goes in at the same time, it comes straight off with the bare peat. With vegetation, it slows it down, but it comes through. And then with the gully blocks, it slows it down even more. It does come through eventually. I think in these, it actually finds its way under. So there it is, just coming out of those. And this one is to show the way the sphagnum moss improves the water quality. So the dirty water in there and the sphagnum kind of filters the water. So again, you can imagine on a moor, if there's loads of sphagnum, it will stop the, I'll just press pause there. Yeah, it will stop the sediment, it will reduce the amount of sediment getting through into the water courses. And so this third one, we've got two trays. This is a tray of bare peat with rain falling on it. And so this kind of is a bit more realistic because it is real peat, and this is a tray of sphagnum moss. So things to pay attention to here is the water's running off really fast, but also what's happening, the peat is being washed away and causing erosion and drainage channels. And then you can see the colour of the water at the bottom. So that's what happens when it rains on bare peat. When we pour it on the sphagnum, for a start, sphagnum is really absorbent. It can absorb up to 20 times its weight in water. It also provides that surface roughness and slows the flow. And then you can see the colour of the water coming off is much, much clearer. So yeah, so those are the demonstrations that I really enjoy doing when I'm out and about, but unfortunately that's the best I've got for tonight. But okay, so I'll carry on. I'll talk to you a little bit more about reducing the risk and severity of flooding when I talk about the science stuff, because we do kind of look to evidence this, and we've gathered some good evidence that that it does actually work. So that's the kind of how it that's kind of an indication of how it works intuitively, but we do have quite a few experiments set up to kind of to show that it does work and how well it works and stuff. So I'll talk to you about that in a bit, because I've got some figures. So the next kind of benefit is to reduce the risk and severity of wildfire, and this is something that, again, when the moors are really, really dry, and when the vegetation is really, really dry, then there's a real potential for them to catch fire. And also that when the peat's really dry, obviously peat burns really, really well. So it's at the moment, well, you've heard about the terrible fires that we've had over the past few years. The wetter condition the moors are in, the less chance of a really devastating fire happening. And we know, again, kind of anecdotally, we know that in area where a fire has raged through, anecdotally, we've seen in the wetter areas, it hasn't burned and the peat, it hasn't got down into the peat as badly. So yeah, so wetter moors mean less chance of fires or less severe fires. So it doesn't mean that they won't happen, but it's just, it can help. And finally, just a lovely place to be, really, for people. So yeah, hopefully you all know, have been on some walks and know the moors and kind of how enjoyable they are for people. So I've alluded a little bit to what the habitat is. It's blanket bog, and it's a bog. It's very, very wet. It's also quite a little bit acidic and dominated by acid-loving plants, and especially sphagnum moss. And that's kind of what characterises bogs and blanket bogs, is the sphagnum. It's quite rare. So in the UK, we have quite a high percentage of all the peatlands in the world. And it's a big terrestrial carbon store, as I said, and carbon sink when it's in good condition. Just a tiny bit of background about where we are and where it is. So that's all the blanket bog in the country, and we're in the little brown circle here. So we're in the most southeastern part. Our blanket bog is the most southeastern blanket bog in the UK. And this is our this is where we tend to work. We do have projects elsewhere, including the West Pennine moors, but the South Pennine moors special area of conservation is an EU designation, and that's the purple shaded areas. So, oops, sorry about that. This is the Peak District, the dotted outline. Can you see my mouse? Yeah, and the purple area is the special area of conservation. It's also a special protection area, which is a designation for birds. So birds including the golden plover, merlin, short-eared owl and peregrine. So it's internationally important, and that's the area that we are working on. And it's probably the most visited moors in the world because of where it is, and the Peak District, we know, is so popular and so well visited. So compared to somewhere like Scotland, you can see that it's a kind of dark patch in the middle of huge conurbations. So very well loved and well appreciated, but that does also come with its own issues, including mentioned wildfires. They're only ever started by people, so all the visitors need to be aware of the fire risk and looking after it as well. So next I'll tell you a little bit about how we got to this state, and then I'll tell you what we're doing about it. So I like this picture because it really shows the erosion as well. So I might refer back to it just to say that you can see where the level of the peat used to be, and you can see that this gully here, that would have all been peat until it was eroded. So that's what I'm talking about. The loss of carbon is quite palpable in that, and also these then form drainage channels. So the drainage drains off, and that's the water drains off, and that's a real problem because it should be wet because it should be a bog. So you can see how dry it can get. So probably the main reason that it came to this is from air pollution from back in the Industrial Revolution, when there was factories basically encircling the whole of that area of moors. So Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds, Sheffield, huge centres of industry, coal-fired power, so lots of smoke, lots of sulfur dioxide, which causes acid rain, lots of heavy metal pollution. And the sphagnum moss, which is the kind of key species and the bog building plant, is really, really sensitive to pollution. And that's because it doesn't have roots. It takes all its water in from either kind of mist and fog or from rain. So it's particularly sensitive to any pollution. So that really decimated the sphagnum on the moors, and the sphagnum is kind of what keeps the habitat together, because without it, as I said before, it holds a lot of water. Without the sphagnum, the other plants, which are bog plants, don't have the same habitat. It's dried out. That means other things like heather can then become over dominant rather than having a good mix. So air pollution was a real problem, and luckily, it's not solved completely, but the acid rain problems have gone away. So any sphagnum we're planting now does seem to be thriving, which is great news. So that's probably the main problem. So once that degradation's happened, then wildfires have taken hold, and there have been some huge fires in the national park over the last 20 or so years. If a wildfire happens, then a lot of the vegetation can completely disappear, and it means that the seed source is gone, so it's not likely to grow back again. So that's a huge reason for this kind of barren landscape. And then finally weathering. So once you've lost that layer of sphagnum and other plants, then it's much more susceptible to the kind of freeze thaw action in the winter. And I don't know if you've been to sites that have a lot of bare peat, but in the summer it can be really friable. You can see that in the wind you can see that it's kind of just flaked off and then it just blows away. Or if it's flaked off and then it rains, then it's washing into the watercourses. And you can see here how a bit of frost, it's damp, a bit of frost, and then the frost expands, and that's your peat kind of disappearing and just washing into the rivers. And we saw in the video before how easily it washes away from the water. So when it hasn't got that protective layer of plants growing, it can weather very easily, and you get this kind of hagged landscape, which is kind of characteristically, a bog tends to be a healthy bog tends to be fairly flat, whereas you kind of begin to get these gullies forming. And again, like I said before, all the peat that would have been in this gully has gone. So those are the kind of three main reasons for the degradation. And you can see the weathering in these photos. This family just happened to find out about us and send these photos in. So they visited Black Hill in 1976 and took a photo, characteristic 70s family picture. And then they all went back in 2003. And this is the same trig point. And you can see where the peat was then and where it is now. Peat grows or builds up about 1 millimetre per year. So if this is a metre roughly, that's about 1,000 years worth of peat lost in that short amount of time. So you can see how critical it is to get this fixed as soon as possible. And there's another one showing a kind of how deep the peat can be with a bit of what's known as bog oak, which would be, you know, over 1,000 years old because it's that deep in the peat. So what are we doing about it? Our main work is actually a fairly simple process of 3 steps. So I'll just talk you through them with a few examples. So first of all is that we work on quite a big scale, so we end up needing to use helicopters for a lot of the transportation of materials. Also, getting vehicles up onto the moors is quite tricky. So this picture shows a helicopter which has just dropped off some big dumpy bags full of heather brash. So that is chopped up heather that's been harvested from a moor that has got plenty of heather on it, and it's spread out. You can see all the bags kind of around in the distance. This is on this is at Staley Bridge, which is where the fire, the Saddleworth fire happened. So you can see all this bare peat here, and so by hand we use contractors to spread the brash out over the whole of the site. And so the reason for doing this is, for a start, it contains heather seed, so it contains a seed source. It also, one of my colleagues likes to describe it as providing a scab, so it protects the peat, it stops it eroding any further, and it provides a little microclimate for the seeds to germinate. So it's like kind of covering it with a protective layer and giving it a start. So alongside that, we spread a mixture of lime seed and fertiliser. The lime is because in some places, because of the acid rain and the industrial pollution, the moors have got so acidic that they can be down to pH 2, which is the pH of lemon juice. So we raise the pH a bit. That gives a better habitat for the seeds to germinate, and then some fertiliser as well. And we use a mixture of grass seeds and moorland natives. The grass is kind of destined to eventually die, but we use it because it's fast growing. So we're talking just normal kind of football pitch grass. And we do that because it grows fast and the roots start going down into the peat and protect, kind of provide, knit the peat together, so stop it eroding any further. So give it a, yeah, kind of what's the word? Yeah, kind of knit it together, give it some integrity, some structural integrity. So eventually those grasses die as the moorland plants start to recolonise. So this is from the same series of pictures as before at the Staley Bridge site. You can see there the brash spread there, and some bare peat here, which would have been covered at some point. And then a year later, you can see those grasses do grow really fast and start to cover it up and get it into the beginning of recovery, and definitely kind of reducing the chance of erosion. And so it's time to hopefully go back there and get another photo of the same place and see how it is this autumn. The next step, or potentially concurrent step is raising the water table. So as I said before, you've got a lot of gullies and drainage channels that have formed because they've eroded. So what we want to do is produce a kind of series of mini dams in those channels to slow the water down and to get the water table back up so that it's boggier. So this picture, I hope you can see that this is peat being laid down to form a dam. So in this case, it's using peat that exists there on the moor, and there are various materials for dams that we use, and that they depend on it depends on the moor, it depends on what we're looking for and what we're trying to produce. So a peat dam is impermeable, so you'll end up with a pool behind it, so that can be really good for slowing the flow of water. It can be really good for raising the water table because that will mean that the rest of the moor will be wetter. And the other options include a timber dam. So you can see here, this is not impermeable, so it's leaky. You can see that the water will slow down, but it won't be stopped. And you can see also that there's kind of a series going all the way up the gully. But as that water is slowed down, the sediment drops out of it, and you can see here it's kind of filled up with sediment, and then the plants have started growing. So it's kind of almost done its job there, and the plants will kind of recolonize, and then the next step could be to potentially put higher dams to raise the table even higher. I think this is Kinder. You can see how deep the gullies are. And also using stone, so that stone would all be dropped by helicopter. And this is again kind of leaky, so it will slow the flow down, it will deposit sediment behind it, and again you can see that it's still quite low in the channel. So but that is gradually raising the water table and getting the moor back into a boggier state. And then finally, a new technique that we've been using a bit recently that we're trialing at the moment. So this is a trial. A bund is re-wetting the moor, but not in a drainage channel. So this is on a flat section, but you can see that this bund has been dug. This is made out of peat, built by a digger, and you can see that water has pooled behind it, and so that again will help in tandem with a bunch of other ones, will help slow the flow down when there's a high rainfall event, and also raising the water table, keeping that water on the moor where it would or kind of should be, so that it can then drain slowly. And then finally, I said there were 3 steps. So we've got the revegetation with lime seed and fertiliser and heather brash. We've got the gully blocking, and then reintroducing moorland plants. And these are plug plants, so that's bilberry, and then the all-important sphagnum. So we're doing a lot of sphagnum planting at the moment, and that is nearly all these days done by hand, and they're tiny little plugs. It looks like one plant. It's actually a mixture of several different species, which, depending on where you plant it, some of the species will do better than others, and you'll eventually end up with a carpet, which I'll show you some of the pictures of kind of how it's progressed. So yeah, planting a lot of sphagnum, and that's done. You kind of plant a plug and then walk a step, so it's kind of between 0.5 metre and 1 metre apart, and so very intensive work, but there's, you know, there was so little sphagnum left, and so there's lots to do. And there's just some more pictures of sphagnum. So that's a little plug, and this is a kind of couple of different species, I think, a nice little cluster there. So the same picture I showed you before, this is Black Hill Trig Point in 2010, and you can see the difference there. Quite cotton grass dominated, but lots more stuff growing. And then in 2016, so that I've been up there quite recently, and there is quite a lot of sphagnum growing up there. So and then a few more kind of before and after pictures, same kind of area. This path was also added to try and concentrate the walkers into one place to kind of protect the peat around it. So and you will have, maybe if you've been up on the moors, seen paths like that around. So that's the progression there. And so you can see here the sphagnum's beginning to really take, and you can see that it's nice and wet up there as well. So in 10 years, you can see the amount of bare peat has reduced by about 90%. So these red bits are the bare peat, and you can see that it's kind of, there's still stuff to do, but it's gradually diminishing. So okay, so that's, let's just see how long I've been going. I'm timing myself. So that's the kind of conservation work. The next bit is about how we kind of evidence our work. So it's all very well doing it, but we need to be sure we're doing the right thing, and we need that. So we have I think 5 or 6 full-time posts doing our science work. So we have quite a lot of scientists working for us, and you can see some of these pictures are designed to show the kind of conditions we work in. A lot of all our work goes on in the winter, because between April and July it's bird nesting season, so we basically have to get out of the way and let the birds do their thing. So a lot of the monitoring work takes place in the winter, and a lot of the conservation work takes place in the winter. So we do all sorts of monitoring, and I'll just give you a bit of background on one of our sites, and then I'm going to show you a video as well that I think we've got time. So this is Kinder Edge, and so this is the north edge of Kinder. This is the downfall, and you're down here somewhere. New Hills, I think. No, that way. Yeah. And so this was in 2009, and the dark areas are kind of you can see where the bare peat is. This is in 2017. So we've done lots and lots of work on Kinder, but what we have done here is left a patch bare, left a patch with no intervention, and we call these mini catchments. So it's an area that flows into a watercourse. I'm not sure exactly where. Maybe it's actually flowing down this way, but it's a mini catchment, so we can measure everything that comes out of that area, and in terms of water, and in terms of sediment as well. So we've left this bare, and we call it it is a control site, and we have some other sites which you can't see because they are revegetated. But we have 2 other mini catchments up here, and we've done some experiments where we do a lot of monitoring, and we've put together the data to compare the difference between if you don't do anything and if you do. So that's quite a big that's quite an important long-term monitoring site, because the other thing is getting data over a long period of time. Because we're funded by project, we have to kind of try and keep these long-term data sets going over a number of projects. So at this point, I'm going to show you a video that my colleague took the other day of Kinder. This picture's of the sphagnum plugs I was telling you about. So this is the same place. If you imagine the plugs when they first got planted, about the size of a 50p piece. So over a couple of years, they've grown to this size. And then, sorry, I don't have the dates, but over, say, 5 years, they've really grown and spread together. And this particular site is one of our other mini catchments where we've we've kind of overplanted sphagnum. So we've planted so much to imagine into the future what it would be like if there's loads of sphagnum. So I'll show you this video that Tom took when it was raining heavily. I'll explain what Tom says. It's really hard to hear, so I think it's better if I do the speaking. But this is on the bare peat site, so this is where there's nothing, no work's been done. So this is kind of the kind of worst it gets, really. And what Tom was trying to show was the flow of water. So it was a rainy day, and you can see that there's kind of nothing growing, and over here, these grey bits, that's where the peat's completely gone, and it's down to the mineral soil, so that's kind of gritty, sandy area. And I'll just, there we go. And so he shows us the water, and you can see the water kind of running fairly swiftly, and you can see that it just doesn't have anything to slow it down. And you can also kind of picture how the erosion happens, because if you've got kind of unfettered water just running along, then you can see how the peat gradually just gets washed away and disappears, and you can kind of see the flow of the water here. And I suppose when we look at the data from these catchments, we then can kind of extrapolate over much bigger areas. So they're quite small catchments, but we can find out how fast the water is flowing, and we can find out how much water comes out of the bottom of a catchment, and then we can use that to see how much that will contribute to the flow of water in the rivers down below. So how much that's going to contribute to potential flooding down below. So you can see the water running quite fast off there, and you can see the gully gradually forming there. So I think in a second we're going to see the second site. So this is same area. So this is the mini catchment that's got extra sphagnum planted, and you can see that it's almost formed a complete carpet where all those different plugs have joined together. So what we have here is the stream, or the water that's running through it is meandering a lot more. It's broken, it's threaded a lot more, so the water's running off much less fast, and there isn't really a kind of a stream everywhere. I think he's going to show that sphagnum kind of holds quite a lot of water as well. So even just planting sphagnum there would reduce the amount of water. He picks some in a minute. Here we go. So you can see how much water that sphagnum holds. And you can see there that the water's not running as fast as well. I'm going to skip forward a bit. Well, do you want to watch it? It's not, for me, it's nice. We're all a bit obsessed with sphagnum. Oh yeah, so here's a mini dam. So you can see that that is also holding back some water. There is water running, but it would have kind of slowed the flow a bit more. And yeah, you can see that it's running a bit. So Tom's up there, I think he's probably up there, he's up there once a fortnight. And he's measuring, he's doing downloads from the equipment that we've got installed up there, and he's measuring things like how much water is flowing out of the catchment during storm events, measuring the water table, checking up on the sphagnum plants. So lots and lots of work around hydrology, so looking at evidencing the natural flood management aspects of the work. He'll also look at how much sediment is being released. So that it's kind of like routine measurements that we then use to build up a picture of what's been happening on those three mini catchments. So the one is the bare peat one is the kind of intensive super sphagnum one, and then one is with the restoration work but without any gully blocks. So sorry, sudden barrage of information, but if you want to find out more about this is a report that was published a couple of years ago called the Trajectories Report, and you can easily find it. Just search Moors for Future Trajectories and I think it comes up to the top of Google. So some of the finding, and this is a report done on those catchments that I've just told you about. So improvement of the amount of less bare peat, more plants, more indicator species plants. The water table gradually increased. So storm flow lag times, that's how long it takes for the highest, for the amount of water to reach the bottom of the mini catchment. So the time it took for the water to come off the hill increased dramatically in the first year after the sphagnum had been planted and the revegetation had happened. And the peak flow decreased. So that's the amount, that's the highest peak of the amount of water flowing out. So if you scale that up, you can see that it could reduce the flooding in the valleys below. These are just small catchments, but if you kind of scale it up, you can imagine it having an effect and reducing the chance of flooding. And sediment was trapped, but dissolved carbon didn't change much. So that if you're interested, if you want to find out more, they're pretty in-depth reports, that's just one of our scientific reports, but it's a recent one, and it's quite. It looks at quite a few different aspects and of the work that we've been doing. At the moment, we have a big project called More Life 2020, and we're collecting a lot of data for that, including we look at vegetation cover and type, and we do that annually. We have a campaign which volunteers go out with quadrats and have a look at the vegetation, and that's not just on Kinder, that's in lots of different locations, as well as measuring the water table depth. We do that every autumn. That's about to start. Then we have a bunch of other experiments going on, and again, maybe if you want to know afterwards, if you want to ask a question, a bit more detail, but I won't go into it now. But as part of More Life 2020, we're doing, we've got quite a few different aspects of the research and monitoring happening. One interesting one is the carbon audit. So we're also we're recording all the carbon that we use, including I have to log how many journeys to work I make. That would have gone down a bit this during lockdown, but we've recently looked into how much carbon was released by a moorland fire at the Roaches, so that's a really interesting piece of work. We were able to do that because we already had peat anchors in place, so we knew the depth, we knew where the peat height was, and then it burnt, and so we could see how much peat had been lost, and so we've calculated that. Again, if you're interested, at the end I can give you more information. And then so the kind of final aspects of our work, so we've got kind of conservation work, then we've got research and monitoring work, is the bit that I do. So we want people to love and value blanket bogs. They've been described as the Cinderella habitat, because they are, not quite as glamorous as certain other habitats. We want people to understand why they're important. So we have our Bogtastic van that you might have seen. We've been to New Mills a couple of times, I think. We go around communities around our project area. Inside is a kind of little mini cinema with a video that kind of shows all the brilliant things that we love about the blanket bogs. And then we have we take the models, so the first video I showed you with the model with the drain pipes, and we take some live sphagnum and we show people stuff, and so that's kind of getting people to understand and value the moors is a really big part of our work as well. And we do that by going out to communities with our Bogtastic van. We also do a lot of digital engagement, so we've got lots of information on the website. We do lots of social media. We hold events, and one of the particular things that I want to highlight to everyone, and I've been involved in, is the BeFire Aware campaign. So trying to spread the word that barbecues and any form of fire on the moors, especially during summer, is just far too risky, and that's becoming more and more clear, and more people seem to be kind of realizing it. But there's still, I'm sure you've heard about, some careless people that can cause huge amounts of devastation. So really trying to push that message in the spring and summer months. So Penny asked me to tell you what you can do and how you can help. So I've come up with a bit of a list. So the first thing is to spread the word and make sure people understand why peatlands are so important. If you'd like to read up, you can have a look at our website. There's plenty to go at on there, and you can follow us on social media. I'll show you the links in a minute. Make sure everyone you know understands the fire aware message, which is to never have a fire on the moors, basically. Yeah, it's as simple as that. So yeah, and why. And you can support our partners, which again I'll show you who they are. There are some of them are membership organisations, so you can join those. There are a couple of organisations who are raising money for us. The Peak District Foundation is the new, I don't know if you know that the Peak District have set up a charitable branch called the Peak District Foundation, and they're raising 70k for 70 years of the national park, and that some of that will be donated to us. The BMC are also raising, the British Mountaineering Council are raising money for us to work on the moors and plant sphagnum. Volunteering, I'll talk about in a second. Our volunteering at the moment is basically full, so you can, I think you can register your interest, but we're quite oversubscribed. So I think that's kind of, people want to say, you know, can we sign up? But at the moment we don't really have. We've got lots of volunteers. We're really lucky. So, but our partners, including the National Park, the National Trust and the RSPB, may well have volunteering opportunities, and you could also try the wildlife trusts as well, and certainly the National Trust and in the High Peak and the RSPB at Dovestone do use volunteers to do work like planting sphagnum and stuff. So and they're working kind of, we work really closely with them on well, particularly at the moment on our More Life 2020 project. And you can also do some volunteering to spot specific species for us through our community science work. So this is our community science project, and you can, so these are 4 different surveys, but that our bird survey, our butterfly survey, our rabbits and hares survey, and our ring ouzel survey, and they're all species which have been chosen because they're pretty easy to identify and spot, and we're particularly looking at how they're adapting to climate change. So things like migration patterns, when they first arrive, when they first or when you stop seeing them. With the mountain hare, we'd like to know when it turns white, when it goes back to its summer coat and stuff like that. So you can find out more on our website, Moors for the Future, and then go to the Get Involved section. So we have, this pictures of we've got some apps, some recording apps. Well, sorry, we've got some identification apps, and this is where you can record these species. But at the moment, I think it's being updated. So yeah, I'm not sure if that one's available at the moment. We're working on it. And yeah, so that's basically all I've got to say, I think. These are our partners. So this presentation today and my job is basically funded by our More Life 2020 project, which is the life funded project. You can find out more at our website. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and you can email me. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Jody. That was really, really fascinating, and I for one definitely want to get out up on the moors as soon as I can. I really want to go and see some of those places that you've changed so much. It's amazing to see. So what I will do is I'll just stop the recording.